Have you ever wondered how the resistance came to be? Well, the antibiotic microbial resistance, of course. Hi, it's me, Moser. So after this video, you should be able to identify and describe how natural selection leads to antibiotic resistance in bacteria. You should also be able to name 4 things humans have done that actually have increased antibiotic resistance in bacteria. And coming into this, you should already know the basic structure of bacteria and a little bit about how they reproduce. Let's get started. So you remember this, our population of bacteria? A population, all the members of one species living in one location. Sure, all one species, but are they all identical? No, there's natural variation in any population. So members of any species will vary a little bit. And, those differences are genetic, and those genetic differences can be physical. In the case of bacteria, of course, this is both because of mutations in genes from when DNA is replicated incorrectly, and it's also from plasmids, those little bits of extra DNA that bacteria share so nicely. So anyway, we remember that in any population there's variation, and we also remember that those variations can be beneficial, they can help the bacteria, or they can be negative. They can actually harm the bacteria. So what if an antibiotic is introduced to this population of bacteria, and what if that poor little guy has some sort of genetic difference that makes it a lot easier to kill? First to die. That little bacteria just lost the game. The game being to stay alive as long as possible and reproduce as frequently as possible. That little bacteria is not passing on its genes. What if we have some other kinds of mutations? What if we introduce an antibiotic and it's killing lots of bacteria, but maybe a few lucky bacteria have some physical difference that makes them much harder to kill? What do you suppose happens then? Well, those particular bacteria have just become winners. They're survivors. They get to reproduce in this new population where a lot of the other bacteria have died. They get to reproduce, and more importantly, they get to pass on those little genetic and physical variations that have helped them to survive. In the long run, this means that populations may start to look very different, with much higher percentages of the population being resistant to any given antibiotic. As a matter of fact, when we take any bacterial population and expose it to any antibiotic, any chemical that kills bacteria, the ones who die first will be the most sensitive, and the ones who survive to reproduce and make up the next generation will be the most resistant. This is just plain old natural selection. Ooh. Okay, can I just say yikes? Ew, this is not good. People, this is bad. Ooh, you're saying that anytime we expose a population of bacteria to an antibiotic or really any chemical, that population is going to become resistant to that chemical? Again, yikes. But we're not doing this, are we? We're not actually causing this, are we? I'm glad you asked. There are 4 major causes of antibiotic resistance, and the first one is the use of antibiotics for non-bacterial infections. When a person has an infection like a cold, which is viral, or the flu, which is also caused by a virus, these are not bacterial in origin, and so antibiotics won't actually fix the problem. But lots of people want an antibiotic anytime they're sick, even if it's not a bacterial infection. When you take an antibiotic and you're not sick with a bacterial infection, that antibiotic goes to work killing off any bacteria in the body that are sensitive to that antibiotic, that are susceptible to it, that are able to be killed by it, even if those bacteria aren't the ones making you sick, or if no bacteria is making you sick. What does this do? Well, it leaves behind bacteria that are resistant to that particular antibiotic. and all the bacterial populations in the body become tougher and more resistant. The second major cause of antibiotic resistance is not completing the course. So when a person has a bacterial infection and legitimately needs an antibiotic, and they're prescribed an antibiotic, but they feel better halfway through the antibiotic. It's okay. I'm all better now. I can quit taking it. If you're prescribed 10 days of antibiotics, you darn well better take all 10 days worth. Because which bacteria did you kill in the first few doses? The weakest ones. The ones that were most sensitive to the antibiotic. Oh. So who was left to reproduce? The ones who were the most resistant to that antibiotic. The strongest. The next time that person has a bacterial infection, that antibiotic is going to be less effective. And unfortunately, they can also pass on those newer, better, more resistant bacteria to their friends and their families and anybody who touches the handrail after them and the person who sits at the same cafeteria table as them. And, ooh, okay. Well, what's next? This is one that we have a little bit less control over as individuals. But the third big cause of antibiotic resistance is actually the use of antibiotics in livestock feed. That's right. Wilbur's been getting antibiotics in his feed. In the 1950s, scientists discovered that if you gave livestock, chickens and cows and pigs, little tiny, what are called subtherapeutic doses of antibiotics, and just added them to their feed, the livestock grew better. They put on weight faster. That's important because animals being able to put on weight fast, that's the basis of, making a profit farming. Well, in the 1970s, there were studies done in Britain and in Japan that showed there was a risk of antibiotic resistance developing from this practice. Well, of course, we were giving little tiny doses of antibiotics to all the bacteria in the livestock's bodies, meaning we were killing off all the weak ones and leaving the strong ones to survive. Unfortunately, colistin, you may remember this from the film we watched, which is a very old antibiotic and definitely an antibiotic of last resort, has been used as a livestock feed additive. Oh no, really? In 2015, a colistin resistance gene called MCR1 was found in pigs in China. And worse yet, in 2016, that same gene, MCR1, was found in a human being in Pennsylvania. Oh, it's been found in pigs in South Carolina and Illinois, and it's still on the move. That's right, colistin. Colistin! This antibiotic of last resort, well, there are now bacteria that are resistant to that too. Oh boy. Well, this is one that we've got some control over. The fourth cause of antibiotic resistance actually seems to be antibacterial soaps and wipes and all that stuff. Many of these antibacterial products contain low doses of an antibiotic. In soaps, it's usually one called triclosan. And after those antibacterial agents are applied to a surface, your hands, the floor, the counter, they just hang out there because those chemicals, they'll go away eventually, but until they break down, there they are, and they're killing bacteria. Unfortunately, the ones they're killing are the ones that are, well, you guessed it, sensitive to them, the weak ones. Who does that leave behind to have all the babies they want? The resistant ones. So the antimicrobial chemicals in these products actually act, in some ways, in a similar function to the antibiotics used in humans. In other words, we're showing the bacteria the test. That's not good. There have been moves to ban some chemicals used in antimicrobials, but research continues to indicate that other chemicals used in antimicrobial soaps and antibacterial products may be contributing to the problem of resistance. So what can you do to remove bacteria that isn't going to just make them more resistant? Good question. Well, first off, plain soap and water, not antibacterial soap, plain soap and water hand washing is very effective at physically removing bacteria from people's hands. Doesn't kill them, washes them down the drain, but without a host, some of them will die anyway. That's one. Heat sterilization is another. Now, obviously, you can't put your hand in a flame, that'd hurt, but instruments, tools, things can be washed in very hot water. Things can be sanitized that way, and bacteria can't become resistant to the effects of heat. And the third, oddly enough, are what we'll call chemical mixtures. Whenever a bacteria is exposed to a single chemical, it's pretty easy for them to build resistance. But some substances, like garlic juice, have hundreds of active chemicals in them, many of which seem to kill bacteria. With a mixture like this, if one thing doesn't kill them, it's almost certain that something else will. Though I will say, you may not want to smear yourself with garlic juice. It might have an impact on your social life. Okay, do you feel like you can identify and describe how natural selection leads to antibiotic resistance in bacteria? Can you name 4 things humans have done to increase antibiotic resistance in bacteria? And as a bonus, can you name a few things that we can do that won't increase antibiotic resistance? Good. That's it.